They told you it was a gift. The way you walk into a room and feel the temperature of every person in it before a single word is spoken. The way you absorb a stranger's sadness like it's weather rolling in off the coast. The way you know, without being told, exactly what someone needs and hand it to them before they finished forming the sentence. A gift. Carl Jung would have called it something colder, an open wound that the world quietly learned to feed from. Because there is a specific kind of person who feels everything, gives everything, and ends up holding nothing. And then there is what that same person becomes the moment they stop. Not the moment they go cruel, not the moment they harden into stone, the moment they simply stop bleeding. That second person is almost impossible to control. And by the end of this, you're going to understand why nobody wanted you to meet them. Most people hear an empath who stops caring and picture a switch flipped from warm to dead, someone gone cold and small and mean. That picture is wrong, and the people who keep selling it to you have never read a word of the man whose ideas built this whole conversation. Jung never used the word empath. He had something far more precise. In his 1921 study of psychological types, he described people whose dominant function was feeling. And he didn't mean emotion. He meant feeling as a way of judging the world, a method, a faculty that weighs every situation by what it does to the living things inside it. For these people, the inner life of others isn't background noise to be tuned out. It's the loudest signal in the room. That sounds like sensitivity. Jung saw the trap underneath it. He borrowed a phrase from the anthropologist Lucien Levy-Bruhl, participation mystique, a state in which there is no clean line between you and the thing you are feeling, where your mood and their mood melt into a single weather system, and you lose the ability to tell which storm started inside you and which one you simply caught from the person across the table. That is the empath's true condition. Not that they feel too much, that they cannot tell whose feeling it is. And you cannot guard something when you can't locate its edges. Sit with that for a moment. The exhaustion you have been calling empathy might not be empathy at all. It might be a failure of borders, dressed up as a virtue. The world has a flattering name for people with no borders. It calls them generous, kind, selfless. It calls them the strong one, the reliable one, the one everybody runs to when the floor drops out from under them. Every one of those words is a leash, and every one of them was placed around your neck with a warm smile and a thank you. Before we trace how that leash gets fastened and the exact place it can be cut, I have to stop for 30 seconds. YouTube demonetized this channel, not by accident and not because of anything sloppy. The material I work with, the parts of human psychology that don't flatter anyone, makes advertisers nervous. So the system quietly turns the lights down on it. It throttles the reach. It buries the videos and waits for you to drift somewhere safer and softer. I'm not sanding the edges off any of this to make them comfortable. I'm sharpening them. So the work they won't let me run here, the uncut breakdowns, the audio sessions, the full written scripts, the frameworks I'm allowed to point at in public but not actually hand you in public, all of it lives on Patreon now. It's $4.99 a month, less than a coffee for the half of this channel the algorithm keeps in the dark. Click the link in the description, pinned to the top of the comments, and join me on Patreon. The door is open. Now back to the wound. The membrane that never formed. A membrane is the thing that decides what gets in. Your skin has won. Your cells have won. Every healthy living system on Earth is defined not by what it contains, but by what it refuses to let through. The empath was born without that filter on one specific channel. Other people's emotional states pass straight through, unscreened, as if they were your own. Watch a child do this, and it looks like magic. The 2-year-old who bursts into tears the instant another child cries across the room hasn't learned compassion yet. They've simply failed to draw the line between self and other. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, and we all start there. Most people grow a wall around it. Some never do. The wall stays thin, or it never sets at all, and they walk into adulthood as fully formed adults who are still emotionally porous on every side. Here is the part nobody tells the empath. That porousness does not stay private. It becomes a function you perform for everyone around you. Jung had a brutal concept for this: projection. He observed that whatever a person refuses to claim and live out inside themselves, they unconsciously project onto the world, where they then encounter it as if it belonged to someone else. And the empath runs a very particular version of this. They take their own unmet needs, the comfort they crave, the rescue they're desperate for, the gentleness nobody ever offered them, and instead of claiming any of it, they go find someone who needs comforting, rescuing, holding. Then they pour it outward. They are not being selfless. They are feeding themselves through other people's mouths. This is the first thing the powerful empath understands that the exhausted one does not. When you cannot tolerate your own need, you will spend your entire life chasing the high of meeting it in somebody else. You'll call it kindness. You'll feel noble doing it, and you will never once notice that the hunger never gets fed, because you keep handing the meal to a stranger. Think about the last time you overgave, really overgave, past the point of any reasonable obligation to someone who never asked you to. Now, ask yourself a harder question. What was the thing you needed in that exact moment that you couldn't bring yourself to ask for, so you gave it away instead? That silence after the question, that's the wound talking. So, you've got a system with no filter projecting its own unlived needs outward and calling it virtue. What happens when the world figures out that system exists? It gets harvested, the resource they learned to mine. In 1983, a Berkeley sociologist named Arlie Hochschild published a book that should be required reading for every person who has ever been told they're good with people. She studied flight attendants, specifically the women trained by Delta Airlines to manage not just passengers, but their own faces, voices, and internal states for 8 hours at a stretch. Smile when you're exhausted. Stay warm when a passenger is screaming at you. Project calm into a cabin full of fear. Hochschild gave this a name that has quietly described millions of lives ever since: emotional labor, the work of manufacturing a feeling in yourself because a situation or a person or a paycheck demands it. And she found something that should make every empath go very still. She separated this labor into 2 kinds: surface acting, where you fake the feeling, paste the smile on, and stay aware that it's a performance, and deep acting, where you actually summon the genuine emotion. Talk yourself into really feeling the warmth, the patience, the care, until the line between performance and truth dissolves. Surface acting is exhausting, but deep acting is the one that does the real damage, because the person who deep acts loses track of where the real self ends and the role begins. The empath is the deep actor of human relationships, not faking the care, genuinely generating it on demand for whoever needs it, until they have no idea anymore which of their feelings are theirs, and which was summoned to serve someone else. Hochschild found that the flight attendants who deep acted the longest reported a specific kind of damage. They couldn't feel their own emotions anymore on their own time. The machinery had run so long for other people that it stopped responding to them. They'd come home and feel nothing, because feeling had become a job, and the job had eaten the worker, and the flight attendant at least got to clock out. She had a shift that ended, a uniform she took off, a self she walked back into in the parking lot. The empath never clocks out. There is no uniform to remove when the cabin is every room you've ever entered, and the passengers are everyone you have ever loved. The labor is unpaid, unnamed, and never finished, and the worker doesn't even know she's working. This is the harvest, and certain people can smell it from across a room. There is a reason, and I'll keep this brief, because it's the one part of this everyone already loves to talk about, that empaths and a particular kind of taker find each other with such grim reliability. The taker is looking for someone who will feel their feelings for them, who will carry the emotional weight of the relationship, so they never have to develop the capacity themselves. The empath is looking for someone whose need is bottomless enough to justify an endless outpouring. They lock together like a key, and a lock that was carved for it. One drains, one is drained, and both of them call it love. But fixating on the taker misses the larger truth, and the larger truth is the dangerous one. You were not chosen because you're weak. You were chosen because you're useful. There is an enormous difference, and that difference is the entire hinge of your power, because a resource that learns it's being mined behaves very differently from one that doesn't. So, picture the empath now, filterless, projecting their own buried needs outward, performing genuine, exhausting, deep-acted care for a world that has learned to extract it. How long can a system like that run before something gives? There is an answer, and it has a name, and the name is the turning point of this entire thing, the day the caring stops. In 1995, a trauma researcher named Charles Figley described a collapse he'd been watching for years in nurses, therapists, emergency workers, the people whose entire profession is feeling with the suffering. He called it compassion fatigue, and he was careful to separate it from ordinary burnout because burnout comes from too much work. Compassion fatigue comes from too much feeling. It is the specific exhaustion of a heart that has absorbed more pain than it had any biological capacity to hold. The symptoms are eerie: a growing numbness, a sudden, frightening inability to care about the very people you've spent your life caring for. Irritability where there used to be patience. A flatness, a deadness, a quiet horror at your own coldness. And here is where almost everyone gets it catastrophically wrong. The empath who hits compassion fatigue believes they have failed. They believe the numbness is a moral defect, that the gift has gone dark, that they've become the cold, uncaring person they always feared was hiding inside them. They panic. They try to force the feeling back. They push the lever harder, pour out more, give past empty, because the only identity they've ever had is the one that feels everything and saves everyone. They are misreading the most important moment of their entire psychological life. The numbness is not the failure. The numbness is the body finally installing the membrane that should have formed in childhood. It is your nervous system doing, by force, the thing your mind was never willing to choose. It is not the death of your empathy. It is the first boundary you have ever actually had. Most people's understanding stops at the panic. They never get to see what's on the other side of it. To see what's on the other side, you have to understand a distinction so precise that modern neuroscience didn't fully map it until the 2000s, and it dismantles the entire premise that caring less makes you worse. Two researchers, Tanya Singer and Olga Klimecki, working out of the Max Planck Institute, put people in brain scanners and had them witness the suffering of others. They discovered that two completely different states were possible in response, running on two completely different circuits. The first they called empathic distress. This is the empath's native state. You feel the other person's pain as your own. The scanner lights up the regions tied to your own physical suffering, the anterior insula, the cingulate cortex. You hurt because they hurt, and Singer found that this state, sustained, leads straight to withdrawal, exhaustion, and the urge to escape. It burns the person out, and cruelly, often makes them want to flee the very suffering they're trying to help. The second state they called compassion, and here's the discovery that should rearrange something in you. Compassion does not run on the pain circuit at all. When the researchers trained people to feel compassion, warmth, and care for the sufferer without merging into their pain, entirely different regions lit up. The networks tied to reward, to affiliation, to love. The compassionate person felt warmth and the desire to help, and it sustained them rather than draining them. It made them more capable, not less. Klimecki's training studies later showed it in plain terms. People taught to cultivate compassion became more willing to help strangers and reported feeling better while doing it. People left to sit in raw, unfiltered empathy reported more negative emotion and pulled away from the suffering in front of them. Same pain on the table, opposite result. The only variable that changed was which circuit they run it through. Read what that means slowly, because it is the entire secret. The empath collapses because they have been running pure empathic distress, drowning in everyone's pain, no separation, no membrane. The thing they fear becoming. The colder state they hit at compassion fatigue is not the death of their care. It is the doorway to the other circuit, the sustainable one, the powerful one, the one where you can witness suffering without being conscripted by it and choose to help from strength rather than being dragged in from compulsion. Stop caring was always the wrong phrase. The accurate phrase is stop merging, stop bleeding into everyone, stop letting other people's storms become your weather. What looks from the outside like an empath who has gone cold is on the inside an empath who has finally separated their self from everyone else's pain and discovered they were a separate person the whole time. The descent. Jung had a word for this separation, and it was the central project of his entire life. He called it individuation, the slow, often brutal process of becoming the specific, bounded, indivisible self you actually are instead of the diffuse blur of everyone's expectations and everyone's pain. And he was clear that it does not happen gently. It happens through a descent. Jung knew this descent personally, and it nearly destroyed him. After his break with Freud in 1913, Jung entered a period he later described as a confrontation with the unconscious. He withdrew. He pulled back from the world, from his work, from the role of the brilliant young hare to psychoanalysis. For years he was assailed by visions and inner figures so vivid he questioned whether he was losing his mind. He stopped performing the self everyone expected. He went down into the parts of himself he'd buried. And what came back up? recorded in the private journal now known as the Red Book, was a man who no longer needed the world's approval to know who he was. He didn't come back nicer. He came back whole. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. The first thing the descending empath has to meet is the shadow, Jung's name for everything you've refused to be. And the empath's shadow is unusually specific. It is the anger they swallowed, the no they could never say, the selfishness they were taught was the worst sin a person could commit, the capacity to disappoint someone and survive it, the cold, clear ability to look at a person in pain and decide with full feeling not to set themselves on fire to keep that person warm. The empath has spent a lifetime exiling all of this in order to stay good, and Jung observed something that should land hard here. The more completely you identify with the light, the darker and heavier the shadow you cast. The person who can only be kind has not transcended their cruelty. They've just buried it where they can't govern it, and a buried thing doesn't stay buried. It leaks out sideways as resentment, as martyrdom, as that quiet, poisonous scorekeeping of everything you've given and never been thanked for. You know the feeling. The exhaustion that curdles into a low, simmering bitterness at the very people you keep helping. That isn't a flaw in your goodness. That's your shadow screaming through the floorboards, telling you it was never integrated, only locked away. Jung said it without flinching. A person is not made whole by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The kindest people he ever encountered were rarely the gentlest by default. They were the ones who had looked directly at their own capacity for cruelty, their own selfishness, their own rage, held it in full view, and chosen kindness anyway. That is a different creature entirely from the person who is kind only because they are too afraid to be anything else. One is a decision made by someone who could choose otherwise. The other is a cage with a smile painted across the bars. There is an old image for exactly this person, older than psychology, and Jung loved it. The wounded healer. In Greek myth, the centaur Chiron was the greatest healer who ever lived, teacher of physicians, master of medicine, the one everyone came to when the body or the mind broke down. And Chiron carried a wound of his own, struck by an arrow dipped in poison. Immortal and therefore unable to die, he was condemned to suffer a pain he could not cure even as he healed everyone else who came to him. He could mend any wound but his own. That is the empath before individuation, drawn with perfect cruelty, the one who pours healing into everyone in reach precisely, so they never have to turn and face the arrow lodged in their own side. The caretaking is real. It is also a hiding place. Every person you rush to save is one more reason you don't have to sit alone with the thing inside you that has never been tended. The myth ends with Chiron giving up his immortality. He surrenders the very thing that kept him trapped in endless service to his pain, and in releasing it, he is finally free. The empath's version is quieter, but it is the same surrender. You give up the immortality of being needed. You let go of the identity that says you only exist when you're useful to someone in pain. And the moment you do, the wound finally gets to close. This is the return. And the person who comes back up is the one almost nobody is prepared for: cold compassion. They still feel everything. That never left, and it never will. The reading of the room, the instant knowledge of what a person carries, the sensitivity to the weather behind a stranger's eyes. All of it is intact, but now it arrives with a wall behind it. The information comes in, and it stops at a border. And on the safe side of that border stands a person who gets to decide what to do with it. That decision, that pause between feeling and giving, is the whole of their new power. Watch what changes. Before, to feel someone's pain was to be obligated by it. The feeling and the giving were a single reflex with no gap between them. You sensed the need. You met the need the way a knee jerks under a hammer. Now there's a gap. They feel the pain, and then this is the part that unsettles people. They choose. They can give fully and warmly from the reward circuit Singer mapped, from genuine compassion that costs them nothing they didn't agree to spend. Or they can feel the pain completely, understand it precisely, and decline to do a single thing about it. Both with total clarity, both without guilt. You cannot manipulate a person like this. The taker who used to extract care on demand reaches for the old lever and finds nothing there. The guilt that used to work doesn't land. The performance of need that used to trigger an automatic rescue gets met with something far worse than refusal. It gets met with accurate perception, because the integrated empath still reads people flawlessly. They just no longer feel compelled to rescue what they read. That is the terror of you fully assembled. Not that you stopped feeling, but you kept the sensitivity and lost the obligation. You became someone who sees straight through every person in the room and owes none of them a thing. And here is the part that may be hardest to hear, because it points the lens directly at you. The people who called your bleeding a gift were not lying out of cruelty. Most of them genuinely loved the version of you that gave everything. Of course they did. It served them. The friend who always called you when she was drowning and never once asked how you were. The family that praised your selflessness in the exact proportion that they relied on it. The partner who fell in love with your capacity to feel their feelings so they would never have to. They were not evil. They were comfortable. And a person's comfort is the cheapest thing in the world to mistake for their love. The question that should keep you up tonight isn't whether they're good people. It's quieter and worse than that. Did any of them ever actually want you whole, or only want you available? You already know which ones flinched when you started setting the boundary. You felt it the way you feel everything, the slight cooling, the accusation that you'd changed, that you'd gotten cold, that you weren't yourself anymore. They were right about one thing. You weren't yourself anymore. You'd finally become it. The empath who stops caring isn't the one who feels nothing. That person is just damaged. The empath who becomes powerful is the one who feels everything, understands it completely, and has reclaimed the single right that was conditioned out of them before they could speak. The right to decide where their own heart goes. The gift was never the feeling. Everyone with a pulse can feel. The gift is the membrane, and it was the one thing they spent your whole life making sure you'd never build. So, the next time you sense the room shift, the next time a stranger's sadness rolls toward you like weather, and your whole body moves to absorb it, notice the gap, the half-second where the old you would already be reaching out, dissolving, bleeding into them. Stand in that gap. Feel the storm arrive and break against the wall you finally built. And then, with all the warmth in the world, and not 1 ounce of compulsion, choose. That choice is a quiet thing. Nobody will applaud it. But it is the most powerful thing a person who feels everything will ever do. And once you've stood in that gap even a single time, you will never again mistake your bleeding for love. One last thing before you go. Everything I'm not allowed to put on YouTube is waiting on Patreon. The sharper breakdowns, the audio sessions, the full written scripts, the work that's too unfiltered to survive the advertiser filter here. It's $4.99 a month. Click the link in the description, pinned in the comments, and join me on Patreon. Most people will close this tab and feel everything all over again tomorrow. Don't be like them. The door's open. I'll see you on the other side.